Hello there, students. Do you realize how little time we have left together, students? It is the beginning of November. Our time is nigh, my friends. We are not going to see each other. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I don't want to be all gloom and doom here on this great video. How are you? Welcome back to the class. This video is the start of a couple of lectures on American dialogue by Joseph J. Ellis, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Joseph Ellis is like one of my favorite authors in American history, and I think you really like him. I think you're going to like the book a lot, so we'll get into that. But first of all, greetings, welcome. Make sure you're checking Canvas. I recently moved some of the dates back for some of the assignments, so take a look at that. I pushed some of the speeches back. I didn't really mention on Discord because I just don't think you guys in the online class use Discord that much. You're like Canvas people, and that's fine. It's your class. You can interact with it however you see fit. I am happy to work with you. Happy to do it. Well, happy night. This lecture is not going to be very long. This is kind of an orientation to the book American Dialogue, and maybe we can compare and contrast a little bit. The last book we read, David Bohm's Dialogue, you guys did a pretty good job in speeches on that. Let me tell you, it's pretty nice. Pretty good stuff to listen to and to think about. You guys pulled some of my favorite quotes from that too. So maybe we'll take a look at some of the things about this book that may orient you to it. I don't know if your cover looks like this. This is a great... The painting on the cover is perfect. You know, we're in New York City. You can go see this painting. Do you know this painting on the cover of the book? I forget what it's called. But it is by American artist Jasper Johns. And Jasper Johns, a lot of his art is at the Whitney Museum.
Oh.
The Whitney Museum is, it's called the Whitney Museum of American Art, but it's mostly the collection of a woman named, I want to say Emily Whitney. I can't remember her first name, but she's a Vanderbilt. And so she had lots and lots of money like the Vanderbilts do. Even though Anderson Cooper, who's a Vanderbilt, says, no, the wealth is kind of gone. His family's like, not really. Maybe you just don't know it's there, Anderson. Sorry. Sorry, Anderson. Might be out of the loop. But Jasper Johns' art, you can go and see this actual painting on the front of this if you go to the Whitney, which is a great museum. I highly recommend it. So let's talk a little bit about this book. I want to talk about the preface because I think this is where he outlines the project. The way to think about this book is his idea of dialogue is complexity. Now, that's a very, very different attitude towards dialogue than what we got from, that's the wrong button. What we got from David Bohm. David Bohm, I think, also believes in a complexity, but his idea of dialogue is to reduce mediation. That is, when we have dialogue, we understand that our thoughts are mediated. I guess it would be to increase mediation. Anyway, the idea is that we need to understand that thinking is a doing and a transformation of what we observe. It's not neutral reporting on something. So I think that the big payoff for Bohm is that dialogue helps us understand that our thought is a form of mediation of reality. If I think something is true, I've had a hand in creating that thought. It's not objectively or neutrally true. So when we have dialogue, we realize that all of our thinking is coming from a place of construction. We have a hand in it. Nobody neutrally ascertains the truth. Nobody figures out what's real and true in a neutral and objective way. It's co-constructed. And I think that's the big payoff there. And David Bohm says that dialogue helps us recognize that, which then makes real politics possible. Now, the difference between that and what Joseph Ellis talks about here is that he thinks that going into history is similar in the fact that it's not a neutral or objective act. We go into history, sometimes we're looking for something. We're like, oh, what can I find that's going to, really help me win this argument? What's going to help me kick some butt here? What's going to help me win? And he says that's one way. But the second way that we can go into history is we can go and learn it And then it makes us think things we didn't think before. So, for example, he has a number of students he talks about here in the preface where he's like, I had students who were Chinese who went and looked at American history, and they came up with all this crazy stuff. His definition of history, the study of history, is an ongoing conversation between past and present from which we all have much to learn. It's very vague, but the idea of conversation between past and present is where he's getting his idea of dialogue, and that should immediately strike you as, okay, this is very different than what David Bohm proposed. Please do not think of David Bohm as somebody who thinks dialogue is sharing all the possible perspectives or making sure everybody's point of view is on the table. That's not it at all. Dialogue is to get people to say their point of view so that we can examine how that point of view was created, not whether it's true or not. It's a big difference. Ellis is similar in a way. Ellis's idea of American dialogue is an interaction between the past and the present that we learn from. We can either say, wow, I was more right than I know. I was wrong and I had no idea. I'm shocked by this. Or I had no idea I believed these things, and from history I learned these things, and now I want to write about it. I want to create it. I want to make it. So the first thing to think about Ellis's take on dialogue is that his dialogue is that history has a power, and that power is somewhat agnostic. Now, what do I mean by that? The power of history can be marshaled to defend things that we want it to defend. And one of his examples is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln decided to research the Constitutional Convention and the early histories of the Constitutional Convention to see if it really was unconstitutional to have these people as property, to have slave owners as property. And he looked at it and it was like, wow. He understood more about it from history than, and of course, Roger Taney, who decided the Dred Scott decision, which is the one that Lincoln was most, pushing on for the national election. He decided it by looking at history too. So it's always a biased game. We're always looking at history to kind of make our arguments stronger. So when someone tries to defend an argument based on history, like, we can think to the current stuff going on with Israel and Hamas. We can look to that, and we see a bunch of arguments that are based on the actual history of what occurred there. Well, the way Ellis would tell us to look at that is that when people go looking for history to defend what they want to believe, they're going to find it. Because history does work in that agnostic way. It's not really in favor of the truth, but boy, when we think history is on our side, we think we have the flaming staff of truth, which, I don't know, is that a D&D item?
Oh.
Flaming staff of truth? Wonder what, can it cast cone of flame? How powerful is it? But people act like this. They think if history is defending what they're saying, then they're true, and they don't really need to do much else. And that's kind of what he's saying. He's like, it's super powerful like that. But at the same time, when one goes into history and starts looking around, what you really find is that it's incredibly complex and difficult. John Adams went and looked at all these other battles to see how they had been won, and he thought that that a defensive war was what they needed to fight against the British, and so history helped with that. So Adams and Lincoln went to the past with explicit political agendas, very much like your friends defending Israel, defending Palestine, defending what's going on in that part of the world, the Gaza-Israeli conflict that's going on right now, or you could say the Hamas-Israel conflict, or you could say the ancient conflict over these lands. However you want to frame it, they knew what they were looking for, so they're looking for a particular thing. And all efforts to harvest the accumulated wisdom of the past must begin from a location in the present. So the questions are shaped by what is being asked, unlike my former students who discovered relevant historical insights later in life. So here are his former students. We got to go back up here and look. There's a Chinese student who done a research paper for me on the Massachusetts Convention. And then back in Shanghai, writing a punitive constitution for post-communist China. Another student said her career as a corporate executive influenced by 2 lectures on the Civil War from both perspectives, which helped her think ironically. So history has these benefits of being not necessarily objective truth that we can base our arguments on, but a way of understanding how to craft arguments now based on what was happening then. So they're flowing and ebbing into each other. They are creative. They're bucking up against each other. There's some resistance there. But then there's also kind of the free-flowingness of going in there looking for something. You're definitely going to find it. So it's not such a bad thing that you go into history, you find what you're looking for. It's agnostic. That's why I say the power of history is somewhat agnostic. It's not really interested in the good or the evil. It's a conversation, and we can bend those words into what we're saying now. And even if we are as honest and straightforward as we can be with history, we're always in a dialogue with it. It's always going to be bent because our questions are coming from the present moment in a context that the historical perspective could never address. And I think it's such a cool perspective. So why did you write this book? Well, a round-trip ticket to the late 18th century from our location in the second decade of the 21st. The founding era was the Big Bang that talked about our destiny as a people and a nation. The questions we're carrying back from the founding are inescapably shaped by our location in a divided America that is currently incapable of sustained argument and unsure of its destiny. Do you think that's true? Are we incapable of sustained argument? I mean, there's lots of reasons for that. As somebody who's a student of argument, I can say there's lots of reasons for that. But he's saying part of it is that maybe the words from the past will create a more sustainable argument and a clearer destiny. And now these obstacles are really bad because the most inexperienced, uninformed, and divisive presidential candidate in American history was elected to the presidency. He's talking about Donald Trump. He's not a Donald Trump fan. He's like, here's the most inexperienced, incapable, uninformed, divisive, the most inexperienced and uninformed president. Wow, that's pretty harsh. So he's saying that this is the time to bring this material in to allow us to be able to make some better arguments today. So he sees the book kind of as a resource, and maybe you can see it as a resource too. One of the things that's interesting about this dialogue-wise is that Ellis's idea of dialogue is a suspension. That is, history is not the big bat that people think it's going to be. It's not the big weapon that people think it's going to be. It's not something we come in and hit people with, and then they're suddenly going to see our point of view. History instead is much slower, and it's a little bit cloudier, but it helps us kind of understand and kind of frame what it is that we want today. So the different chapters, he has the chapters that we're going to talk about in the class are this chapter on race, which I think is super interesting, about Jefferson and Washington, their views on that. And then the chapter on the Second Amendment, which is Madison. So we have a couple of more talks. There's going to be 3 total for American Dialogue for this class. And that's what the other 2 are going to be about when I get around to making them. Hopefully I'll make them pretty soon. And then you can see. But one of the things that I think, another thing to think about Ellis that I think is very, very important is that he thinks the historian's discourse, which is a discourse of conversation and blending of different ways of addressing a question, the presentist way of looking at a question and bringing the past into it, and then the past ways of talking about the question in their context kind of mixed together, is a superior discourse to adjudicating most of our legal and political questions to law. Like, he doesn't think that judges and looking at the law and judges the way it's done is an adequate way to address political questions. Most of this book challenges the law as any kind of a way of doing it. And here's part of how he's going to do that. Although the founders are busy being dead, they still speak to us in the vast archive of letters and documents they left behind. The historical record is so rich because the revolutionary generation realized they were present at the creation, and they therefore preserved their thoughts in the belief that posterity wanted to remember them. Over the years, a small army of editors has worked studiously on that preservation project, producing the fullest account of any political elite in recorded history. So this is going to become important later as he talks about the archive argument, or the argument that, I call it the archive argument, but it's the argument that Joseph Ellis makes that if you really want to be an originalist, a constitutional originalist, it's all there in the archive. We can pretty much know without a doubt what these people wanted, how they tried to frame it, and what the controversies were about framing what they wrote in the Constitution, what they wrote in the Bill of Rights. It's all there very clear. And anybody who's like, we have to speculate what the founders wanted is kind of talking out their ass. In other words, they haven't been to the historical record. Now, the historical record does not function in law in the way it would. You would think they'd go and look at this stuff, but judges and attorneys look to the law itself. Stare decisis, what came before. What was the past decision, and how do we keep those decisions consistent in the terms of judges' decisions? They don't go and look at what Madison said. They don't look at what Jefferson. They don't go and look at it. There's lots of speculation about what these people thought and what they must have thought and why they worded it that way that isn't looked at the documentary record. So the importance of dialogue is that you have to bring in that other voice, and we have an extensive archive of that other voice, the voice of the founders. We have an extensive archive. We could go and look at that. The suggestion, there's an ongoing conversation across the centuries, is a literary conceit, but we pay homage to the dialogue every time we cite the seminal texts of this founding to fortify our current convictions. So when people look at the Constitution, or they look at Jefferson or Madison's letters, or things Jefferson wrote, or things Madison wrote or did, or the wording of the Second Amendment, we are looking back to them and using them as evidence. So we're bringing them into the conversation. Ellis says we should bring them in more fully. He wants better argument about them. So he doesn't really want a conclusion. He wants us to argue richly and more better about them. And that's why I think the book American Dialogue is really about nuance and subtlety and uncertainty when we're thinking about political questions. We always want to keep it open, especially when we're talking about rights and things like that, gun control rights, human rights and things like that. There's lots of people on social media, lots of people on YouTube saying, we can't debate about human rights. We can't talk about it because when we talk about it, we create a false equivalency where it could be that people won't get human rights. No, we have to debate about this stuff. That false equivalency is only there if you think that when someone loses a debate, that's made the decision for you. No, debates help bring out arguments, clarify arguments, add to. Like, it's not a distillation process. There's lots of people out there who think we should look through the public record of debate and argument and distill the best arguments out of it, and then we can make a good decision. Not really. Debate helps blow up what can be said, restrict what can be said, and it's happening over time. And just because somebody wins a debate, it doesn't mean that they found the right answer. It means they won a debate. They didn't find the truth. They didn't find the right answer. They won a debate. And we can do with that what we want. Now, what Ellis is saying is these debates should be more subtle, more open, less clear, and less like a bulldozer, less like a battering ram, which is the way people tend to use history just because they don't understand the subtleties and complexities of what the founders thought. And we know that because we literally have almost everything they wrote about the Constitution preserved. And it's just lazy that Supreme Court justices and other people don't go look at that archive. If you're a real originalist, you would go and look at that and say, wow, okay, I'm going to try to be more like Madison. I'll try to be more like Jefferson. I'll try to be more like John Jay. I'll try to be more like Hamilton. These are the people who should be emulated, not an imagined position where people are trying to figure out, well, what they must have thought about rights. No, we know. We know what they thought. And their greatest legacy is the recognition that argument itself is the answer. We have to have this perpetual argument. So Ellis kind of agrees with me that a continual argument that's subtle and refined and full of I'm not sure, but is our democratic responsibility in the democratic republic that was set up for us by the Constitution. That is, we should be sharing our opinion even if we're not sure, because the not sure part is an important part of the structure of how our democracy is supposed to work. It's not a factocracy. It's not a truthocracy. It's not that at all. It's democracy, demos, the people, right? So we need to be bringing this in and having the conversation with them and what they want. So there's 4 chapters. The first chapter is about race and about Thomas Jefferson and how Thomas Jefferson lived this incredibly contradictory life. Somebody who wrote incredibly inspiring and passionate words about freedom and liberty, but at the same time owned his own children as slaves, was raised by slaves, required slaves to take care of him at Monticello, and never thought about freeing them, never really thought about, he just lived on their labor. And it's just weird. He lived this contradictory life that's really conspicuous and crazy. So Jefferson is a figure that Ellis thinks we can look to his thinking and writing about it as a way to think about race today. And that's what he talks about in chapter 1. Maybe I'll do a chapter 1 lecture separately from this one. But what I want you to take away when you think about Ellis and what Ellis's ideas in this book is this is a very different kind of dialogue than what David Bohm is giving us. David Bohm's dialogue is to show us that thought is mediated. Ellis's dialogue might be to say rights and American democracy is mediated through a conversation that is unclear, but we cannot avoid it. That is, we have to return to the roots. We have to have the American dialogue. We have to return to the roots and what they said and bring those conversations ahead, or we're not going to get anywhere. Our legacy is sustained argumentation. We have to have their opinions in it, and they have to be their real opinions. We can't distill it, and we can't just assume that we can know what people from the 18th century thought like. We have the receipts. We have, as kids would say, we have the receipts.
Oh.
That's something that kids say, right? We have the receipts. So we have everything they thought. Why aren't we going to use that to boost and to help push our dialogue forward and our conversation about what we want our country to look like today? Why don't we do that? So we're going to look at 2 chapters in this book. I hope you'll find them interesting. The first one will be about Jefferson Washington and the question of race and African Americans, slave people, but also black people, and how it's all kind of spilled over. Ellis is pretty good talking about that. All of those things about the legacy of slavery affect all black people today in the United States, I'd say. And then the other one is about guns. Everybody likes guns. We're talking about the Second Amendment, Madison, and some of the arguments about that. We'll look at that in a more sustained conversation, kind of show what Ellis wants us to do and how he wants us to have debates about restricting guns in the United States and what kind of guns should be restricted. So I think it'll be good. And then that'll be the end of that. And then we'll move on to the final book of the class, Snow Leopard, which will be out there soon. So as always, get on Discord, talk to me. Talk to me on Discord. I'd love to hear from you. Discord's popping off all the time. If you're not sure to get on Discord, look on Canvas. There's instructions on it to get on it. You're still welcome. Even though there's only less than a month of the class left, you're still welcome on Discord. And you're welcome to stay and continue these conversations. So let me know what you thought of this. And let me know if you need help with anything. I'm always at your disposal. As always, thank you once again for being in the class. And I hope you found this video valuable. And I'll see you in the next one.